We are taught that empires are built with armies, with territory, with crowns. That is a convenient historical lie. Because to wage war, to build palaces, to wear a crown, you need one single thing: money. This is not Caesar's Rome. This is the Rome of cash. The 15th century. A single family held the purse strings of both the Pope and the kings of Europe. They didn't need to give orders. They just needed to tighten the purse. The Medici, the family that turned banking into a weapon. They didn't need swords, only interest rates. They didn't rule by law, but by debt. So ask the question, what happens when one family controls the money of the Pope, the Tudors, and the French nobility? The answer is, they are no longer lenders. They are the masters. Welcome to Florence, the city where merchants prayed next to brothels, where artists traded politics, and where money was worshipped more than God. This was not a place of inherited aristocracy. This was the playground of the sharp-minded. The Medici. They did not come from royalty. They were not military commanders. They were bookkeepers. They were bankers. An occupation initially considered a sin by the church usury, but which was the indispensable bloodstream of Renaissance Europe. They built what we would call today the first multinational bank. No internet, no phones. Yet the Medici branch network stretched from the dim cathedrals of Bruges to the bustling markets of Venice. They moved money, but more importantly, they moved information and power. This network operated on mystery, secret dealings, double entry ledgers, and something called political credit. That's when a loan is repaid not with money, but with a vote in the city council, an office in the Holy See, or silence before a crime. There were three architects: Giovanni di Medici, the man who transformed a small money-lending shop into an institution; Cosimo de' Medici, the father of the country, the puppet master in the shadows. He never held official office, but no decision was made without his nod. And Lorenzo de' Medici, the strategist who turned money into culture, and culture into unbreakable power. Giovanni de' Medici did not invent the bank. He invented the modern bank. Before the Medici, banks were local money changers, always fearful of robbery and reliant on luck. Giovanni changed everything. His model had two pillars. First, the independent branch system. Each branch in London, Lyon, or Rome was a partnership company. This allowed the Medici to minimize risk. If one branch failed, the entire empire would not be dragged down. The second pillar, double entry bookkeeping. This was the secret language of power. Every transaction was recorded twice. This was more than just a technique. It was a guarantee of trust. If you trusted the Medici books, you could trust their word. Giovanni's greatest move was lending to the Pope. The Holy See was the wealthiest, but also the most aggressively spending organization. By becoming the official bank of the Vatican, the Medici gained not just massive service fees. They gained two things money couldn't buy: status and information. Every donation, every papal transaction went through the Medici ledgers. They knew who was sending money, who was receiving it, and who was in debt. Under Cosimo, the family rose from wealthy to untouchable. He knew money created enemies, so he sought protection in something stronger: the people's loyalty. Cosimo poured wealth into culture, sponsoring artists and scholars Donatello, Fra Angelico, and more. This looked like benevolence, but it was Europe's first soft power strategy. When a Florentine citizen saw Donatello's David, a work funded by the Medici, they didn't see a usurer. They saw the father of the country. Naturally, this rise could not occur without creating enemies. The Albizzi family, the old Florentine nobility, detested the way a mere banker was controlling the city. They saw votes in the council shifting from aristocratic influence to the influence of cash. In 1433, the Albizzi got their wish. They accused Cosimo of corruption and conspiracy. A swift trial, and Cosimo was sentenced to death. But Cosimo had learned the most important lesson. Money buys everything. He used funds to bribe his jailer, turning the death sentence into exile to Venice.
Viva!
This was a fatal mistake by the Albizzi. Cosimo wasn't worried. He simply pulled his money, and Florence collapsed without him. Rival banks panicked, merchants lost credit. When he returned, it wasn't as a refugee, but as a king without a title. He proved the truth. A city can survive without nobles, but not without the Medici. Cosimo built what historians call a false democracy, a republic outside, a dictatorship of money inside. Under his grandson Lorenzo, the dynasty reached its golden age. Lorenzo was more than a banker. He was a poet, a diplomat, and the Renaissance's greatest patron. Lorenzo perfected the art of family power manipulation. Cosimo used money to buy public favor. Lorenzo used money to buy mythology. He made Florence the cradle of the Renaissance. Botticelli, a young Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, all were names indebted to Lorenzo. While artists were painting angels on ceilings, Medici clerks were hiding horrific secrets in ledgers.
Beautiful.
Every generous sponsorship of a statue was a perfect smokescreen. The people were gazing at art. No one was paying attention to who controlled the government. This is the definition of soft power, a term we use today. They just needed to ensure that Europe's cultural glory could not exist without them. Overthrowing the Medici was overthrowing the Renaissance itself. The Medici's power was not just in their account balance, it was in their interconnectedness. They lent to noble families, then arranged marriages. They lent to the Pope, then demanded the right to appoint cardinals. The archives reveal the real Medici-Vatican dynamic. The Medici didn't just lend, they controlled the borrower. Many papal loans were secret deals, trading church privileges for emergency cash. They even forced Pope Sixtus IV to route tax revenues through the Medici Bank. So when a poor German peasant paid a church tax, the money went to Florence first, where the Medici used it to cover the Pope's debts. They turned the Holy See into their personal ATM. This was financial manipulation at its peak, using the Vatican as their shield, legitimizing banking on a new scale. The Medici could start a war and say a prayer in the same day, using the same ledger. But not everyone could be bought. In 1478, Medici hatred erupted into one of history's most shocking assassination plots, the Pazzi Conspiracy. The Pazzi Bank, backed by Pope Sixtus IV, desperate to break free from Medici control, conspired to kill both Medici brothers. During Mass, the two Medici brothers were attacked. Giuliano, Lorenzo's brother, was stabbed to death. Lorenzo, lightly wounded, escaped. The Florentine people were not frightened. They were enraged. They didn't protect the government. They protected their idol, the Magnificent. This was the final proof of Lorenzo's power. With Giuliano's body lying in blood, Lorenzo didn't need an army. He just needed to invoke the name Medici. The populace did the rest. Everyone involved in the Pazzi conspiracy was hunted down and publicly hanged. After the Pazzi conspiracy, Lorenzo reached the pinnacle of control. He didn't just rule Florence. He dictated the political system of Europe. But the price of absolute power was very high, and it was clearly recorded in the account books. The Medici did not just lend, they invested in their borrowers. To maintain the loyalty of kings and popes, Lorenzo had to allow them to accumulate massive debt. The greater the debt, the tighter the political bond. But the financial risk increased exponentially. The kings of England and Burgundy were the biggest debtors, but also the worst debtors. They didn't repay. To cover these large losses, Lorenzo did something dangerous. He siphoned capital from the bank's funds to finance the Florentine government and his personal art projects. He sacrificed the health of the business to maintain political control. Cosimo built the bank to gain power. Lorenzo used power to fund the bank. The difference was small, but the consequences were devastating. The Medici Bank was no longer a healthy financial institution. It was a political tool bearing unrecoverable debts. When Lorenzo, the Magnificent, died in 1492, he left behind a glittering cultural legacy. Michelangelo and Botticelli were creating masterpieces, but he also left behind a financial time bomb. Records reveal that under Lorenzo, the Medici Bank started to crack. Key branches in London and Bruges struggled, and their biggest clients, the kings of England and Burgundy, were also their worst, never repaying their debts. The Medici Bank, unable to withstand massive withdrawals and continuous losses, collapsed. The greatest financial empire in Europe fell not because of a war, but because of poor risk management and the systematic abuse of capital in exchange for political power. They won the war for power, but lost the financial war. The bank's failure was final, but the Medici's power was not. They didn't retreat. They just changed the battlefield. They had spent decades bribing and sponsoring cardinals. And then Lorenzo's son, Giovanni, became Pope Leo X. Later, his nephew, Giulio, became Pope Clement VII. The money failed, but the political and religious influence they purchased remained. The rise of two Medici popes proved a terrifying point. Even after their financial empire crumbled, they still controlled the soul of Europe. They transitioned from bankers to spiritual leaders, using the Holy See to continue the game of power. Florence lost its freedom. Europe was dragged into complex religious and political wars. Art flourished brilliantly under Medici patronage, but at the cost of the city's independence and the church's integrity. That was the price paid for absolute power. The Medici Bank fell, but the Medici name survived, shifting from finance to theocracy. Lorenzo's son, Pope Leo X, used the wealth of the Holy See to finish his father's grand artistic and architectural ambitions. But to get the money, he accelerated the sale of indulgences, one of the direct causes leading to the Protestant Reformation and the schism of the Church. The Medici failed as bankers, but their legacy fractured Europe. Their money fueled centuries of conflict, even as it sparked the brilliance of the Renaissance. They built power not with crowns or swords, but with debt and information. An empire made of ledgers and bribery, a reminder of how easily money can corrupt both art and faith. So, what is the Medici legacy for the modern world? The Medici created the world's first financial power model. They taught the world how to use money to control politics, religion, and war from behind the scenes. Their banking system, especially the use of branches and accounting techniques, is the foundation for our modern financial system. Today, multinational corporations and large investment funds operate by the exact logic of the Medici. They don't need armies. They use investment capital to influence government policy. Through culture and media sponsorship, they crafted a glowing public image to hide their shadow's soft power at a global scale. The Medici are gone, but the principle remains. Rulers change, the keepers of the purse endure. Their fall is a warning. Even the greatest fortunes collapse when greed, bad risk, and personal ambition poison the system. They traded absolute political control for financial stability, a price that, in the end, not only they, but all of Europe had to pay. And that leads us to the haunting question, one that remains valid today, in the boardrooms of Wall Street, London, and Shanghai. So who truly rules the world? The elected official, the formal seat of power, or the one who holds their purse strings? As a contemporary once said, banks have no armies, but sometimes they win more wars than kings.